everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Small Church Musicians Podcast. My name is Justin. I'm your host, and I'm a small church musician. I'm on a journey to find the best sounding equipment for my budget and to talk about the songs and artists that God has used to make me who I am. This week, we're going to talk all about what it means to make your own sound as a worship leader. But before we dive in, I just want to remind you all that if at any point you enjoy anything about this episode or anything I say or I talk about, to give us a follow on Spotify and to give us a like for more episodes like this. My goal is to get us up to 100 listeners by the end of June, and it would really mean a lot to me if you'd like the show, follow, and subscribe for more episodes. I have a really special episode in store for us if we can get that goal, and I'm so excited to see what God does with the show. But with all this said, let's dive in. So this week, we're talking all about what it means to create your own sound as a worship leader, or creating your own musical identity is another way to put it. And what brought this up was this past week, I attended the Chris Tomlin and Kane Holy Forever worship concert in Newark, New Jersey, and it was such a great show. I can't wait to talk about that next week. But what really stood out to me was not only how talented they all are and how great a worship environment it was and how awesome it was getting to worship with all those people in one place. Now, what really stood out to me was how unique Kane was versus Chris Tomlin. They're doing their own thing. They did their own take on Glorious Day by Passion, and it completely blew my mind. It was so unique. It was so different than the original track, but you felt every single thing that was going on, and it felt just like the original while still being very, very different and very, very country. If you haven't guessed, I love country music. But I feel like so many people in the world of worship music want to sound just like the big names. We want to sound like Dan Carson from Chris Tomlin, myself included. Dan Carson's like my guitar hero. We want to sound like David Hislop from Bethel or Elevation Worship. We want to sound like E. Edwards from Elevation Worship. We want to sound like Nigel Hendroff because those are the people we grew up listening to, and we think and we believe that have helped shape the world of worship music and make it what it is today. But we don't have to just sound like them, because I feel like when we strive to just sound like those particular artists, we're putting a limit on ourselves as musicians and as worship leaders. And we're saying, if I sound just like this person, then I'm doing the job right. But here's the thing. You don't have to sound just like your heroes. You don't have to do the exact same thing that your heroes do. You are in such a unique position. You don't have to play exactly the same way that your influences do. You can use what you've learned by listening to your influences in your playing, but you don't have to play the exact same way that they do. You don't have to sound exactly like they do. Otherwise, you're just doing glorified cover music, and I mean that pun literally. Here's the thing. It's not about building your own individual name, but maybe through what you do, you start breaking new ground for the world of worship music. Let me tell you a quick story, and this isn't about breaking ground. Let me talk about an experience I just had. This past Palm Sunday, my worship team did Hillsong United's Hosanna. It's an amazing song. It's so powerful. It's got a great message and really ties in to the message of Palm Sunday. We worked so hard to get it to sound the way we wanted to, and I'd worked my backside off trying to learn this really intricate lead guitar part that I'd never attempted before this, because it's not a new song to me, but it's my first time as a guitar player trying to play the lead bit. And I worked so hard throughout the whole day. I worked my backside off, like I said. I got it right, and then we went to do it, and it didn't sound right to us as a team. It didn't feel right, I think is a better way of putting it. So we said, okay, what can we do to change this up? And I cut a good chunk of the lead bit out. I kept the core of what made that riff what it is, and we did it exactly like that, and it worked. And people came up and said, that was such a beautiful song. We had people crying in the congregation, and I'm so proud of how our team handled it. We changed it up a little bit to suit our style as a band, and oh my gosh, it was amazing, and it was such a powerful moment. We also closed out that particular Sunday with our own version of King of Heaven by Paul Baloche. It's one of my all-time favorite worship songs. We had everybody who had just been in a really fantastic play called He Is Risen come up and sing the chorus of King of Heaven with us, and it was amazing, and people said, what a powerful moment that was, and what a powerful way of welcoming Jesus into our hearts as we enter Holy Week. And it was just such a special moment, and it's one I'm never going to forget. So the core of today, what we're going to talk about, is this. Find what works for you from a musical or instrumental perspective and work with it. So what does that look like? Well, it can look like anything and everything. If one of your heroes on a particular worship song that you love is using a guitar with P90s and you don't own a guitar that has P90s, it's not a bad thing. Use a guitar with humbuckers. It'll sound a little different, but it's okay. You don't have to do exactly what your heroes do. And I'm going to say that a lot throughout this episode. If your hero's using a Vox AC30 and you don't have access to them, but for some reason you have access to a Marshall, use the Marshall. Or if you have access to a Fender Twin, use the Fender Twin. If, like me, you don't even have access to a really high-end amplifier for your worship music and you've got a couple of amp emulators like my Ruby or my Dream 65 Reverb, use that. If you don't have the same pedals that your heroes do and you have something a little different, it's not the end of the world. Nobody's going to hate you for it, and your sound's not going to be bad. What matters is your ear, your music director's ear, and the sound that you're chasing, the tone that you're chasing. And your playing is what ultimately matters. That's how you create your sound. You don't have to do exactly what your heroes do. Find what sonically works for you. And I'm going to say this a lot too. Find what works for you musically, financially, mentally, and sonically, and stick with it. That's not saying limit yourself, and that's really not saying don't push yourself, because you always need to push yourself. You can always develop your skills. You can always get better. You can always find something that you think makes you sound better. But you need to trust God and trust your gut that what you're doing sounds good. But here's the thing. Always be open to feedback. Always be open to criticism and development, because that's part of what makes us who we are, and that's how we grow as people. It's been a hard lesson for me to learn over the years, and I still struggle with it, 100% honest with you. But you can always get better, and you always want to get better. But that's not necessarily through having the same gear that your heroes do, and that's not by buying the same gear that your heroes do. You need to work within your means, financially, musically, and skill-based. And it's within those means that you will find what makes you who you are as a worship leader and as a musician. Throughout my life, I've always struggled with comparing myself to others, and once I got into leading worship and I felt the call, I really started comparing myself to other worship leaders, especially the pros, and that's my own insecurity, and that's my own failings, and I need to trust God and trust His guiding way. For the longest time, though, I've been thinking to myself, if I just get that guitar, or I get that amp, or I get that pedal, I'll be able to sound just like my heroes, and my music will be exactly what it needs to be. But here's the thing. You don't need to do that, and I need to tell myself I don't need to do that. I need to follow my own advice. I still love trying out and experimenting with new gear, and I'm ashamed to admit I'm a gearhead, and I can't deny that part of me. I love experimenting with new sounds and trying to see how I can push myself sonically by experimenting with new gear. That's not a bad thing. But here's the thing. I've never needed to. It's so simple and yet so complex, and I want to talk a lot more about this in later episodes of the show, but it's so important that you and I trust God to guide the worship with the gear that we have. It's more about your heart and your playing than your equipment. If you're leading from a heart that says, I've been called by God to be here to lead these people, and I want to help the people connect with Him in a really meaningful way, and I want to worship God while I play, that's the right mentality that you have to have. Not, I need to buy this $5,000 guitar and everything will be better and it'll sound great and I'll be able to show the congregation how cool my gear is. That's not what we're about. We're about making our own individual sound and really letting God shine through the music that we bring before Him and we use to help the congregation connect with Him in a real and meaningful way. Because here's the thing, y'all. God can and will use anyone and everyone at any point in their lives for His kingdom's glory. You can be at any point in your life, at any financial place, and God can use you for His kingdom's glory. That's what it's all about. You don't have to have tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and guitars and amps and pedals and effects, and you don't have to have a multi-$1,000 PA system. You don't have to have all this stuff. You can work within your means, and God will work within your means financially, spiritually, mentally, physically, skill-based, and so many other places. He will work within it all because that's who He is. But let me ask you all, what do you think goes into creating your own sound for worship music or just music in general? Is it your overall musical knowledge? Because I'll be honest with y'all, I don't have a whole lot of musical theory, skill, or training. Is there something more? Is it the concept of working within your means and skills? Let's make this a two-way conversation because I'd love to hear from you all. So please sound off in the comments. And so, friends, that brings us to the end of yet another episode of the Small Church Musicians Podcast. My prayer is that this episode has been of some help and insight to you all out there, and you can help me out by liking the show on Spotify and on Facebook, Instagram, and X. We're on all the social media, and leaving us a review. I firmly believe that God has some amazing things in store for this show, and my prayer is that he would use it as a resource for all worship leaders, but especially to my fellow small church-based musicians. We're trying to get to 100 listeners by the end of June, and if we do, I have a very special episode planned out, and I'd love to be able to do it, and I'd love to be able to share it with you all. So please share the show on social media, and let's grow it together as a community. As always, friends, remember that even though we're all working within a unique and individual set of circumstances, God has called each and every one of us to leading his people in worship, and that's an awesome and humbling responsibility. And we all need to know that even though times can get difficult, you need to know that you're not alone on this path. You have friends, you have allies, and you have resources on this road that you've been called to walk. And as always, I'm Justin. I'm a small church musician, and I'm on a journey to find the best sounding equipment for my budget and to talk about the songs that God has used to make me who I am. And I'll see you next time. Have a great week.